we'll get going then. Today I'm just really going through the VS Risk and Compliance Manager. These are our cyber risk tools which sit on our Cyber Comply platform. So some of you existing customers that will have already be familiar with our tools, and some of you might be new customers, so you're just getting a first glance at this. So our Cyber Comply platform essentially holds 5 compliance tools. All of them have individual functions, but then all of them integrate with one another to really strengthen those functions. And today we'll focus on the VS Risk and Compliance Manager. So you can see here just a run through of today's discussion. So what I'll do is I'll talk you through the introduction, then just going a bit understanding the ISO 27001 standard, creating and maintaining your asset register, your risk assessments, and then run you through the report. What I'll do is I'll talk you through them all on the presentation, and then I'll actually go into the portal and we'll run through an example that I've got. And then, like I said, at the end, we've got the Q&A. So our introduction. Again, so if at any point while I'm going through my screen doesn't match up to what I'm saying, please do just drop in the chat box or raise your hand. I believe there is an option to do that, and we can do that, not an issue. Apologies. So no, that's frozen. Oh, apologies, my screen. Okay, brilliant. So introduction. Okay, cool. So this is just a few VS Risk Cloud features that you can see here. It's an information security risk assessment tool. It's built around the ISO 27001 framework. So not only is it good for organizations who are looking to get that certification in ISO 27001, it's also really useful if you're just using the standard as best practice. And then, you know, perhaps in a couple of years, it might be something that you are looking to get the certification in. But if not, like I said, it's just best practice. And it ties in really well with GDPR. So if you are within the EU and you do have to comply with GDPR, it works really nicely. So you can see here, it will allow you to conduct information security risk assessments really quickly and easily. That's what our tool is designed to do, streamlining that process for you. It's fully aligned to ISO 27001. And as you can see here, it's helping businesses of all sizes. So here, just continued introduction, you can see you can create multiple risk assessments. So this is essentially your scope, and then different conditions within that, and look at different parts of the organization. So different conditions, that's referring to the likelihood and impact scales that you may have. So for example, in this, your organization, the account that you set up will be your ISMS, but within your ISMS, you might have different areas that have different likelihood and impact scales. So this tool allows you to separate those and then conduct individual risk assessments on those different conditions for different parts of your organizations. There's no limit to the amount of risk assessments you can conduct, and you would either conduct asset-based or scenario-based risk assessments on the VS Risk Cloud. You can see here as well, you can link your assessments to your particular asset. So I'll go through that as well. And there's a list of threat vulnerability combinations, all aligned with ISO 27001 that are already in the tool. And you also get to add customized ones as well. So the tool allows you to be as specific as you need to fit your organization requirements. So we've just got a bit about Compliance Manager. So VS Risk built around ISO 27001. Now Compliance Manager works really, really well with the VS Risk Cloud, and it gives you access to a whole nother set of controls. So you can see here it is a database of legislation. So it also has regulations on there such as GDPR. And then you can see essentially what you do is you work through them like a checklist. So you can declare which ones are not applicable to your organization, which ones are selected and they're planned, which ones are selected and implemented. And then there's additional comments, so you can add implementation details. excuse me, sorry. So then you've got creating an inventory of your contracts as well. With Compliance Manager, you can add that and then record any additional security controls that you have in place. So we have ISO 27001, but also Compliance Manager gives you access to ISO 27032, NIST controls, CSA, PCI DSS, CES, and also organization controls. So you can add any specific control sets that you as an organization work towards, and you can link them so they're all accurate. And then with that as well, you can say whether they're implemented, etc. So you can see here, it's just how many controls we've got. And like I mentioned, you've got the GDPR articles as well. Okay, so we'll just go over a bit about understanding the standard, more about understanding it within our tool. So in the review control selection, you can see here, you can check and view the controls, like I mentioned, whether they're planned, they're implemented, etc., excluding the ones that aren't applicable. And there's also area to add a justification as to why it's not applicable or not considered. And then also, when you do select a particular control in the ISO 27001 standard, what is your reason for selection? So is that business, statutory, regulatory, or a legal requirement? And then a chance to elaborate on that as well. And then all of the data, as you can see, is incorporated into your statement of applicability. So we've got about creating and maintaining our asset register. So in the VS Risk Cloud, or in the CyberComply portal as a whole, really, no matter what different tools that you have, your asset register in CyberComply is global, so you only ever have to import it once. So it can be used in any changes you make will be used in any of the tools that you're using that particular asset in. You can import an existing asset library. I know many of you probably will already have your own library, so you can use that. You just need to transfer it into our Excel template, and then you simply import it into the tool, and within moments your asset register is on that. And with that, there is no limit to the number of assets, so that's always useful for if you're a larger organization. However, you can also create a new library. So if you're not already working on an Excel spreadsheet, you can add them as individuals as well, and then build up your library from scratch in our tool. And like I mentioned, it links to all of the areas in the CyberComply. And you can run a report on your asset register. It's up to you the different types of reports that you run. So I'll go through that a bit when we're in the tool, but you can either run it on all of your third parties assets, all of your as the controller assets, and then you can link them to risks, the owner, you can have any outstanding task. And for any of you who do have perhaps any of our other tools such as data flow mapping tool, DPIA, etc., you can also link that different parts of CyberComply to that particular asset. So we've got creating an asset or scenario-based risk assessment. So they're the two options in our tool. So like I mentioned, you can customizable likelihood and impact scales, and on those likelihood and impact scales, I will run through this through the example, but there is additional context tabs, so it just allows you to be really specific, and when you're going and you're scoring that initial risk and that residual risk, you have an exact reason for each score, so you can see how much that financial impact would be, or what likelihood that is that a percentage that you count as a likelihood scale. Criteria scoring grid as well, so again with that when you're assessing that initial and residual risk. And there's also a privacy risk add-on on our VS Risk Cloud, which is something really useful. So for those risks that not only do you want to assess the risk to the organization as a whole, but it's also relevant to assess the risk to the rights and freedoms of your data subjects. So this privacy risk add-on, which is just inclusive of your licensing at all, it's not something you have to get separately, that allows you to do that as well. So again, it's just giving another level to your risk assessment that you're conducting. So then we just have our reports. So I will go through these at the end, but just so you just leave it on this screen before we go into the tool. when we first go into Cyber Comply, you'll see the dashboard, which gives you a top-level view of all of your risks, all of the tasks that you have associated. So that's really useful as well for members such as stakeholders, senior members of staff that, you know, perhaps aren't actually involved in the project and assessing the risks, but of course they do need to have a view of what's going on and to see what their top level risks are. The dashboard is a really useful function of the Cyber Comply platform for that. You can see as well the main outputs of the VS Risk Cloud are the 2 audit ready reports, which is your statement of applicability and also your risk treatment plan. And there's a whole other range of reports that you can pull off as well in Cyber Comply. So that's what I will go through with you. So I'm just going to go into the portal now. As I mentioned, if anyone does have any questions, I will go through the Q&A at the very end, but please do pop them in the chat box if you have any now, and then we'll get through. So you should all be able to see the Cyber Comply dashboard now. What I'll do is I'll go through the dashboard at the very end once we have actually populated our risk. It will just make a bit more sense and you'll have a bit more context. But just to navigate around, you have this drop-down menu here. So for VS Risk Cloud and also Compliance Manager, you will have access to the dashboard, to assets, to contractual, to ISMS controls, and these are the additional. So we're going to be focusing on ISO 27001, which the VS Risk is built around, but you do have access to all of these other controls, which you can show as that you've implemented when you're modifying a risk as well. They will be available. Organization controls, where you can actually input your own specific controls, aren't necessarily already on the platform. You've got legal, so you've got GDPR, UK laws, and again, organisation regulations, which gives you the opportunity to add them or any specific regulations that your organisation works towards. And you've also got risk assessment, and then with the tasks, you have access to organisation tasks. So that's just a run through of that menu there. Before we go into the assets and then go into the actual risk assessment, I will take you through the settings section. So it's just been idle for a while. So with the settings section, this is where you can add customized fields. So you've got custom regions of where your assets are located. Some of these fields are more relevant to the data flow mapping tool, if any of you have those, or DPIA tool. So in this, what you're really looking for is the custom threats and vulnerabilities. So I did mention we have an extensive list of threat and vulnerability combinations already in the platform. However, this is where you can add specifics. Really easy, you just add threat, you can type that in here. It's a free text bar. Be as specific as you need, that is whatever's relevant, and then you simply save, and then that will be available in the tool. So that's where we get those from. Another way to go into any of the tools, you can go from this drop down menu here. So I'll just go back to the dashboard. And then we'll go into the assets. So this is the asset register. As you can see here, I've already got a list going through numerous demos, webinars. I've built mine up. I will go through creating a new one with you now, though, just so you can see that. In order to create or import your existing asset register, all you need to do is go on import assets. You then download the Excel template, fill that in so you can transfer it from your existing template, and then you simply drag and drop it into here. Then once you import, your entire asset register will just populate. So it's really easy, really quick. There's no limit either. So if you are a large organization and you do have hundreds of assets, this tool will be able to hold all of those for you. So then we'll create a new one now. All of the fields that you can see on the screen at the moment, they are exactly the same fields that you would fill out in the Excel template. So it's exactly the same there, so you can get an idea. So we've got the asset type. The asset I'm going to create now is personal identifiable data, as that's what I'm going to use in the example risk assessment that we will conduct in the next part of the webinar. So create the asset type. You can see here we've got a drop-down menu. If the asset type that you're looking for isn't there, you can select other, and then it will bring another box for you to then specify what that other asset type is. So in this instance, we're going to say person is the asset type. And the reference, as I mentioned, is personal identifiable data. And the operator, so that will be a controller. And the owner. So the owner and description are the only two fields on here that aren't mandatory. They're just purely to elaborate on as much information as you can give, and that will show in the report as well. So as specific as you can be, the better, but these two fields aren't actually mandatory. So if we did want to say the owner in this case is our HR manager, and our personal identifiable data is actually our employees' data. And then you've got location, so we've got the list of the countries. If you did in the settings section where you can specify the locations, so perhaps I've selected United Kingdom, but I might want to specify that even more and say it's Cambridgeshire is the location. And then, like I say, you can add the description if you want, if there is a description, like so. And then you simply save. And then if I search in here, we can bring it straight to the top, like so. So then just to show you around, you can open all of the assets on this menu here. And then you can open them onto this middle panel. So the report that you pull off here will run a report of whatever you have open in this middle panel. So whether it's your entire asset register or whether it's the specific controller owned, etc., etc. The color coding, so you would have noticed when I first went on this screen that I had purple and green. So all of the purple assets are owned by you, the organization whose account it is, and all of the greens are owned by anyone else. So that's the only difference there. Then moving through, so here we have ways that you can use this tool to associate relationships in other areas of your compliance. So in CyberComply, we have the privacy tools, which is the data flow mapping tool, DPIA tool, and the GDPR manager. Then we've got our cyber risk tools, which we're going through today, which is the VS risk and compliance manager. And then, like I mentioned at the very, very beginning, all 5 of those tools interact with one another to strengthen each individual functionalities. And this is where you show that relationship, and those relationships are then shown on the report. So some of these, depending on what area you are on the tool, will auto-populate, and some of them will be manual. So all of these tabs that you can see at the bottom, no matter what area of CyberComply, you will see the same options. So you'll notice this as we're moving through in just a moment. So whether you're on assets, you're on processes, you're on risk assessments, you're on any of the controls, any of the tasks, each of those elements you will be able to show the same associations. And then, of course, depending on what area you are, depends on which will auto-populate. So for example, if this particular asset, I'd already conducted a risk assessment on this asset, then that would show here. When we actually do, this is the one I'm going to do the example on, when we do actually conduct that risk assessment, you'll see that that's already shown that relationship. And then records, so if on the data flow mapping tool, any personal data records that are stored on this asset, that will automatically show there. And any related assets, so some assets are going to be related. Of course, they're separate assets, but they do have an association. And if you want to run that report to show that relationship, this is where you would do so. So if you associate asset, it then gives you the option of your entire asset register. And then you just simply select that. The plus icon will close, and then it's showing that our distributor is associated to that personal identifiable data. So then here you have two things. So first of all, any comments. With the comments, you can drag and drop any supporting documentation that you might have in any of your other documents on your computer, on your SharePoint, whichever you may use, but it does strengthen that asset and you do want to have it, just drag and drop it here. You also have the history. This is an audit trail. With your account, 5 users will have access. So this just allows you to see who's gone in and edited what, where you're up to. Say someone in your team left for a holiday and you wanted to see the last thing that they did on Cybercloud. It just allows you to do that. Then you've got any processes, so that's related to data flow mapping tool. If you use any of your assets in a process, then it will show here. That's another automatic population. Then you've got any related tasks. So I'll go in a bit more detail when we're actually on the risk assessment to showing tasks, but if there are any tasks associated to your assets, then you just create your task here. You can assign it to an owner. The owner will be any of the users on your portal. So you can see that I've only got myself on this portal. You can assign a deadline. You can add any hyperlinks that are relevant as well. And then the next 3 are all to do with Compliance Manager, so the other side of our cyber risk tools. I mentioned that in Compliance Manager, you can document any contracts that you might have between third parties or stakeholders or anything like that. And this is where you would add those contracts that you have, and then that will show that association. Related legal requirements, so in the legal area here, so any GDPR, UK laws or organisation regulations, you can add that as a requirement to show that that's associated to that particular asset. And the same with the controls. So in the ISMS controls, you have access to all of these with Compliance Manager, so you can show that some of those are associated to that particular asset. And then that's all shown in the report that you can pull off that will show here. And you can see that if you add all of those, where that will come into play. So that essentially is it for the asset register. So I will take you into the risk assessment. And like I've said going through, please, if you do have any questions, drop them in the chat box, drop them in the questions section, and then I will get back to them in the Q&A section. Cool. So in this section, we're now in the actual risk assessment. So going through the introduction, I mentioned that you can create multiple assessments that show different conditions of different areas in your organization. So this is where that comes into play. If I create new, this is either creating a new assessment, which is the likelihood and impact scales, or it's creating a new asset-based or scenario-based risk. So first of all, I'm going to walk you through the example that I've created, and we're going to add some additional context to that. And then we'll go through and do an asset-based risk assessment on our personal identifiable data, which we just added into the asset register. So when you create new and it's an actual assessment, it will open up here. So you've got the assessment name, you've then got your likelihood scales, and then moving on, you've got your impact scales. And you work through those, and then once you save that, you've created your assessment. And then as soon as you save that, it will be available in this drop-down menu here, and then you would choose that particular assessment, so the scope, the conditions, to then conduct either an asset-based or scenario-based risk assessment. So with any tool on our Cybercloud platform, they're designed to be repeatable, to be able to use this year in, year out. Your organization's risk landscape will constantly change, so this is designed to change with you. Therefore, you can edit this assessment at any point. So I'm going to go through this editing one, and we're going to add some more context to it as well to go through. So you've got the assessment name. So I've put Vigilant Software are Ely offices. So if you are a larger organization, and perhaps you do have offices in a few different locations, whether it's in the same country or different countries, but you do still class them all under the same ISMS, However, you know, your office, say we had our office in Ely and we had an office in London, those two offices would potentially have different likelihood and impact scales. Something that's a particular level 5 impact in the Ely office might be slightly too low for a level 5 impact scale in the London office. So this is where, or this is a type of things that allows you to show that differentiation between your areas of the business, essentially. Or perhaps it's just a department, perhaps a different department in your organization. There's a lot more of an impact in particular risks, so it just allows you to show that. With our likelihood and impact scales, you can scale up to 7, you can scale down to 3. So again, up to you. We have general likelihood scales, as you can see, which is the highly unlikely to the highly likely. However, you can edit these. So right off the bat, you can edit the general scales that you might perhaps use a different definition for. In addition to that, you can add additional context. So I have already added for this demonstration frequency. So you can see different ways of specifying that likelihood scale. Another context that you might add, so all you do is add context, might be the probability. So again, this is example percentages I'm using, but you know, it just gives you an example of the types of things you can put in here. However, the specifics are completely up to you as an organization and what fits yours. So it could be 1 to 4% chance of occurrence. I've got 5 to 34% chance of occurrence. So depending on your scales as well, that depends on the additional context that you add. And of course, if your scaling does change at any time, and your acceptance criteria, which is in the next section, you can change this, you can go in and you can re-edit it. So it's fully flexible in that way. And then I simply save, and then we've got our probability there. So that's your likelihood. There's no limit to how many you can add here as well, so it's completely up to you. So then you've got the impact on the organization. And the impact on the organization, first of all, this is the standard, this is what ISO 27001 assesses, and then in the next screen we've of course got that privacy add-on that I mentioned. So it works in the same way. You've got your impact scales 1 to 7. How you scale that completely is up to you as an organization. So already in the tool, we have the impact on the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability, all aligned to what is defined by ISO 27001, and you're trying to protect, of course, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of any of the information that you have as an organization. So the definitions you can see on my screen for those 3 are already integrated into the tool, so they are how you would see them as well when you log on. However, you can edit this, you can customize it. If there's a different way of defining it, that's not a problem. So you save that. And then, of course, as you go up, that will go up too. So then 2 examples I've already added. So reputational impact and operational impact. So they're things that I've added for the purpose of this webinar. So you can see here, we've got the scaling. Reputational, you know, you might go from just disgruntled employees to national news coverage of the breach, which would have a huge impact. Operational as well. And then another example, you might want to say the financial impact. So, and with this, again, I've just got example scales here. So this would be, you know, whatever is relevant to your organization. And you can do that. And then the amount of fields you have, it all depends on that scaling. And then you simply save. Then moving down, we have our acceptance criteria. So you can see here our acceptance criteria scoring grid. We've got the 3 standard criteria: broadly acceptable, tolerable, and intolerable. And you can see them on this grid here. You can edit the values, so you can also rename them. So some people, you might work towards level 1, level 2, level 3, rather than acceptable, tolerable, and intolerable. It's completely up to you, and this tool just allows you to be customizable and specific to your organization. You can also change the color as well. And then how you move around is you would just simply select the grid or the squares that you want to have as that acceptance criteria, like so. And you can also add additional criteria as well. So it's fully customizable to your organization. So then moving to the next screen, we have the privacy risk add-on that I mentioned. So this is the impact on the rights and freedoms of our data subjects. Works in exactly the same way as the other two screens. You've got the general, and then you can add any additional context. And then there's another acceptance criteria, because your acceptance criteria for the risk on your organization as a whole, and also the rights and freedoms of your data subjects, it might vary. So this just allows you to have that variation. So you can go in and edit any, as I've said, it will change as your risk evolves as well. This warning will just appear. It's just letting you know if you have changed the likelihood and impact scales and the acceptance criteria on an assessment, and you already have individual asset or scenario-based risk assessments, then those changes might affect. So you would just need to go back in and re-edit your initial and residual risk scores. Any of the controls that you've implemented, you won't need to re-edit. It's just those initial and residual risks, just to make sure that they now fit your new scaling. And it's just to ensure everything's accurate. The different reports that you pull off from this tool will help you get they will help you pass your external audit. So the tool just needs to make sure everything's accurate. So I'm going to cancel it just so it doesn't muck up the one that I've done, and I don't have to reschedule it, but that's how you would save. So here I've got an example of a scenario-based risk assessment that I did prior. So you can see here, we've got our scenario title at the top, and then the description. And then you can see my risk summary. So you can see that I've assessed the risk to the organization as a whole. I haven't chosen to assess the risk to the data subject. It wasn't relevant to this. You can see my responses to modify. And then once I have modified, my risk is now acceptable. And then the risk owner is the director. So that's a scenario. So we will run through an asset-based risk assessment. So once you select that, it brings up this really nice risk wizard. Now, for the scenario-based risk assessment, it looks exactly the same. It's just the asset, threat, and vulnerability sections aren't here, and this is just replaced with scenario, the title, and the description. So that's the only difference. Then moving past that, all of these are exactly the same. So what this risk wizard is designed to do is allow you to move step by step through your risk assessment, not miss any parts. It's going to be a comprehensive risk assessment that you can then report to pass an audit, or again, just work towards best practice if a certification is not what you're going for. Either way, this is how you would conduct that risk assessment. So when we select our asset, all of these are from the asset register that I showed you at the very beginning of going through the tool. You can type it into the search bar and it just brings it up to the top essentially, so you're not looking through it. So you can see here. So select our asset, and then you can see as we're moving through as well, it builds up the summary on the left-hand side. So you don't have to switch between the different tabs on this risk wizard. You can just refer back to that summary to see where you're at. So then the threat. As I mentioned in the introduction, we have a comprehensive list of threat and vulnerability combinations in the tool, as you can see here. So I haven't added any customized. Everything that you see on this list, I know I'm scrolling through it quite fast, but you can see the length of this. This is already integrated into the tool, so you will have access to it as you see on my screen. And then if you added any customized threats and vulnerabilities, they will appear straight at the bottom. So you don't actually have to spend ages scrolling through it. You can either go straight to the bottom or you can type it into the search bar and it'll bring it to the top. So in this example, the threat on our personal identifiable data is going to be a data breach. So you can see here it brings it to the top. So then we move to the threat vulnerability. So I'm selecting the different tabs at the top, but you can use this arrow here to take you to the next page. So again, it's just personal preference. So then you've got the vulnerability, exactly the same as the threats. This is an extensive list already in the tool. You can add customized vulnerabilities, etc. So our vulnerability that's going to exploit our threat will be failure for our staff adhering to company policies. So there you are. Cool. So we have our asset, threat, and vulnerability. So now it's time to actually assess that risk to the organization. And this is where the likelihood and impact scales will come into place that we've just created. So we can see here. So I'm just going to start, I'm just going to plonk it on 4 by 4. With this, you can see where that additional context comes into play and why it's really important. So as I didn't save my changes, which was a mistake on my part, that's why I don't have the probability that you saw me add, and then also the financial impact. But you can see where the additional context is. So if I had have saved those changes, that's where that would show. And any other impacts that you have on here, that will list. So what it means is that when you're actually assessing the risk, you might have in your head, okay, well, I think the likelihood is about a 4. It's quite likely, impact, it's quite high. But then when you actually select where on the grid that sits, you can then look at that additional context and say, okay, well, operational is only 5 days. Actually, the operational impact would be slightly higher than that if the risk was to happen. So then you can move that around and actually have an accurate reason for why you selected the scores to be there. That really helps. Say my financial had saved, this is £100,000. That's the financial impact for this particular risk. So then if you need to modify that risk and you need to implement controls, the majority of controls, there will have some cost associated to it. And you need to go to your board of directors and you need to say, okay, well, I need this amount of money to ensure that I implement these controls. This allows you to go with a bit of ammunition and a bit behind you as well, just to show, okay, well, the risk is going to cost us £100,000. It's going to cost us X amount to implement these controls, which then means when I've reviewed the risk, if it was to happen, the impact is only £10,000. That's quite drastic, but you see how that would work. So it's really important that you write all the additional context. So I'll leave it as that for now, and same with likelihood as well. So if that was the probabilities, that might be my probability for likelihood 4 was a 65 to 89% chance of happening, so very high. And then this is where the privacy risk add-on is. Like I said, it's an add-on, so if it's not relevant to that particular risk, then you don't have to toggle it on. You can just leave that part. So in the scenario-based risk example that I gave you, that was the case. I didn't toggle it on. This is personal identifiable data. Our data subject in this instance is our staff, our employees, and there will be a risk to the rights and freedoms of data subjects. I don't know whether any of you heard in the news a couple of weeks about Morrison's, and someone, an internal person, actually leaked, I think it was nearly 100,000 employees' data about payroll as well. So, you know, say it was something like that, a similar situation in this assessment, that's going to be huge impact. And I think Morrison's have already spent £2 million sorting it out when the breach first happened, and if they are found liable, they now have to give compensation to every single one of those employees. So the financial impact is huge. So I'll put it as 5 and 5 in this instance. And then, you know, on that impact, you can clearly see, you know, this might be, I mean, say it was on the scale of Morrison's, you know, your impact could be 6 million, higher even. So then you set your response. All of the terminologies on this response, they're all in line with what is used and what is recognized by ISO 27001. So that's whether you decide to retain the risk, if it's perhaps in that initial risk, it's either broadly acceptable or it's tolerable, and it's not cost effective to actually try and modify it. So you're happy, you would leave it. Or you modify the risk. So if you modify it, this is where you're going to implement the controls that both reduce the likelihood and also the impact. So it's really important to find that balance. Certain controls will have a bigger effect at reducing either the likelihood or impact. Then you can share it. So for example, if you share with an insurance company, that's one way. Or avoid. So if that risk is just too high, it's too likely to happen, it's too big a risk, say the asset is easily exploited, you might just choose to avoid the risk, just remove it completely, it's not worth even having it, and that's where you'd select that. So we're going to choose to modify our risk, which means we get the option of selecting our controls. So it gives you total access to ISO 27001, and if you scroll to the bottom, it gives you access to organization controls, and it will also give you access to the other controls such as NIST, PCI DSS, CES. So this is where you associate all of those controls. Much like the other tabs of this risk wizard, if you know the particular controls, you can just type it in here, so it will bring it straight to the top and it just saves you a bit of time. So I have some controls already selected, so I'm just going to type them in here and it will bring it straight to the top, and this is designed to reduce our risk. So I have compliance with security policies and standards as a vulnerability, failure to adhere into those company policies. So you can see here as I'm going through, you can see all of the controls, all associated, all reducing different sections. So protection of records, this could be those personal data records of that staff, and you just select. Another thing with any of the controls on here, if you select the drop down menu, the drop down arrow, sorry, you will see a more in-depth description. So if you don't come to this part of the tool and know exactly which controls, if it is a brand new risk assessment, you're not sort of transferring it, then you can scroll through and you can have a look, and then you can read just to make sure that it is the right control for you. And also you can go back in and edit, and you can add controls at any point. So if you do add these controls, you implement them all, they're still quite a bigger risk, it didn't reduce it as much as you expected, you can go back in and you can re-edit this as well, and then pull off a report to show that. So after we've modified, we've implemented our controls, we've selected the controls to be implemented, we now review the risk. So again, like I mentioned, when you go into your business case, you can see, okay, the initial risk, this was the impact, this was the likelihood, this is the financial impact, this is the operational impact, we need to implement these controls, and now I can see, okay, well, this is how much it reduced the operational impact, this is how much it reduced the reputational impact, financial, etc. So I leave it as a 2 and a 2 for this. And finally, we finalize the risk. So who that risk owner might be. This isn't a user in the tool, this is a job title. If you are a smaller organization, then of course, however you want to specify this, if you do want to put the person's name, then it's actually completely up to you. It's just whoever owns that risk. So I'm just going to put HR manager for this. In the messages as well, you've got add comments. So like I showed you in organization assets, you can drag and drop any supporting documentation that might just strengthen that risk assessment, and also add any comments. And then save and close. So you can see here as well the difference between a scenario-based risk assessment and also our asset-based risk assessment. So you can clearly see underneath that scope, you've got a mixture of both. You can have a mixture of both. Whichever type of risk assessment you as an organisation choose to do more of, that is completely up to you. Both are recognised by ISO 27001. So it's your organisation's preference and also just what fits your requirements, really. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to run through this middle panel with you in a bit more detail. I'm then going to show you the risk treatment plan, and then we'll go back into the presentation and I'll run through all about going through the controls on ISO 27001, and I'll show you the statement of applicability. So going through this middle panel, I've already shown you, so all of these are exactly the same fields that you have options to show relationships in the asset management or asset register. So I won't go through the individuals of these, I've already gone through those with you. Here as well, though, you can see all these related controls are the controls that you've said you're going to implement to modify that risk. And you can edit the controls, like I mentioned, and it will take you straight into here, and you can go straight to those controls, and then you can edit those. So it's flexible in that way. And then this report here, so you've got your audit ready report, your risk treatment plan, and also your statement of applicability. And then you have other reports, so much like the asset register report that you can pull off, this report here as well, to show any of these tabs, the relationships to other areas of your compliance. As at the end of the day, whether it's GDPR, regulations, risk assessments, controls, all compliance is related somewhere or another. So this just allows you to show that. And whatever you have open on the middle panel, that's what will show on your report. Now to show you the risk treatment plan. So the risk treatment plan will be whatever is underneath a particular assessment / scope. So you can see here, you can print it as well, print it to PDF. You can see it's just an overview of your risk treatment plan. You've got what that scenario in this case was, the response, the owner, which controls. You've got the task. So the tasks that you can see down this panel, they are tasks that are associated to the control specifically. So that's when we're actually in the ISO 27001 standard area of cyber comply. At the moment, we're in the VS Risk Cloud area of cyber comply. So any tasks you show on this bottom panel here will show here on the risk treatment plan, as those tasks are associated to the risk as a whole, not just specifically the control. So you've got the asset-based risk assessment that we've just done, we've got the summary, the response, the owner, and the controls, and then the tasks. So that's it basically for the VS Risk Cloud. As you can see, it really didn't take us that long to do an individual risk assessment. It's designed to be streamlined so you can move through it logically as well, and you can go in and edit at any time. There are just a few more things I want to show you on the tool before I go into the presentation and go over the statement of applicability. So I'll just do that now, and then we'll switch back to the presentation. I'll show you the statement of applicability, and then we'll go over and we'll do a Q&A. So two ways you can get to the controls is either, and the statement of applicability is either through here, you can open it, and then that select open, it will take you into the control set, or through here, you can select that. But what I'll do is I will just show you the task option. So any of the tasks that you've associated here, whether that's in assets, it's in risks, it's controls, will show on all of these reports, of course. But if you did want to just have a report on just the tasks, here is where you would find it. So you can see I've been very original with my task names going through demos. I think they're all pretty much testing, but you can see how this would work. So you can see all of mine are completed. I have one overdue. So if you wanted to perhaps, oh, I actually have a task with a different name, but you can see how you can select the different tasks you wish to report. So again, whatever's open in this middle panel, you can run a report of. So whether that is all the overdue tasks or completed, etc. And then you can show the relationships here as well. So then just quickly going over the dashboard. The assets, so I've shown you this area of the tool. It just gives you an overview on the dashboard of the different asset types that you have and just summarizes those for you. You can then enter the dashboard, the assets, sorry, via the dashboard here. Then we've got organization risks. So the drop-down menu here, that is the assessments that we created. So any of the actual risk assessments with different likelihood and impact scales, they are, as opposed to the individual risk, that's what you're selecting. So this is the one that we did on today's webinar. And then you can see here, you've got the top level risk. So you can see on this grid where your initial risk was and then where your residual risk was there. And then you can open your risk and it will take you into VS Risk Cloud from here. The reason why there's a different risk assessment that you wouldn't have seen when we were actually in VS Risk Cloud is because if you have DPIA tool, it also pulls through from your privacy risks as well, which has its own column here. So my dashboard has a couple of extra components that, unless you have our privacy tools, data flow mapping tool, DPIA and GDPR manager, you won't see on your dashboard. So it's not like they'll show on your dashboard and be empty, it just won't be there. So it's not something to be concerned about. Processes, part of DPIA's and data flow mapping tool. The map, however, this just gives you an overview of the locations of your assets, so you can just clearly see where you are located across the globe. Then you have the tasks. So the task that you have, you can see here, and then you can open the task and it will take you to where that task is. With Compliance Manager, you'll have access to this. So you can select on each of the particular controls and it just gives you that top level view of where you're up to, how many of those controls are excluded, not considered, planned, implemented, etc. Same with the legal requirements. And then the contractual. So if I show you the contractual part of the cyber comply, this is where you would add your contracts. So with the entire cyber comply platform, everything is updated in real time. So between you and the 5 users, or you and the other 4 users, I should say, everything that you're doing in editing will be updated and you'll see everyone's changes. The only areas of cyber comply where that is not true is in Compliance Manager, in organization contracts, organization controls, and organization regulations, and that will just ask you to switch to edit mode, which is really easy. It'll just bring it up, so it's not something you have to think about. And that is just to give you a bit of space really, and just to give you a chance to make sure everything that you're updating, at the end of the day, it's all legal. So it needs to be accurate, it needs to be precise and also reliable. So just going into edit mode just means that you have that bit of privacy, you can add everything. One of your colleagues won't accidentally, change something if they're editing the same thing. And you'd fill that out, you'd save it, and then you'd publish your changes. At the top here, it will say publish changes, like so. Perfect. So I'm going to take you back into the presentation now, into the PowerPoint. So we've gone over this. This is just the reports, as you can see. I have mentioned all reports can be printed and exported as a PDF. So I showed you how to get to the ISO 27001 standard on the drop-down menu. I will say the reason why I'm showing you it on the presentation as opposed to the tool is we are just currently UAT testing an update, and I thought it was much more beneficial for you to all see the update, as it will be released this week or next week, within there, as soon as we've approved the UAT. But I just thought it was much better for you to see that and what that would look like. So that's the only reason this is in the presentation as opposed to the tool. However, at the moment, it still looks the same in the tool. It's just the reasons for selection. So what you'll do is once you go in through this drop-down menu that I've shown you, you go into that control set, and then part of an organisation creating your statement of applicability is to go through each of those controls, and then you need to mark whether it's not considered, it's selected and it's planned, it's selected and it's already implemented, or is excluded, it's not applicable. So for every single one of these that you select for each control, it'll open up a window that will ask you your reason for selection. The reason for selection will either be risk assessment, which you can't tick, that will just automatically tick if you've conducted a risk assessment on it, business requirement, contractual requirement, statutory requirement, or regulatory requirement. You can select multiple, as you can see on my screen. So then in addition to that, it will ask you for any notes and then any implementation details, which will then show on that particular control. You can see as well, you've got all of these tabs that I've shown you throughout, whether you're in the assets, you're in the risk assessment. So that will just show you relationships to all the other areas. Here, which is related legal requirements. So with the Compliance Manager module, in addition to VS Risk Cloud, the legal requirements from GDPR are already automatically associated to each of the ISO 27001 controls. So the tool already give you that to say that these are related. You can edit and change it, and they've been associated by our legal team, so everything is correct. But if there are any additional requirements, say that you think are relevant, from organisation requirements that aren't necessarily already in the tool, you can edit it, but we have already given those suggested. So 2 different types of reports you can pull off. The report that I've been banging on about the whole webinar, that shows you all of these different relationships, that's here. And then the star next to it, which the only control you'll see this in is the ISO 27001, and this is your statement of applicability, which looks like this. So obviously that will be for the entire standard. So if we go to the other screen, this report will just show you the particular controls that you have open in the middle panel. However, your SOA, as it is an audit ready report, will have the entire standard. And you can see here, so it's just got all of the information on it. It's just got what that is, the description. It's then got whether it's planned, not considered, implemented, etc., and then the reason for that selection. Brilliant. So that does conclude the example and the actual training webinar from my point, and lead us on to the Q&A. So I have just been asked to have a few minutes before we go through into the Q&A. So what I'll do is I'll just put myself on mute so that you don't get the background of my office. It gets quite noisy around lunchtime, but you don't get the background of that. Give me a chance to just read the questions that have come in, and you can write any that you might have in addition. And then, like I say, I'll read out the question and the answer. But just before I do that, I just want to say thank you very, very much for everyone who has attended. I do hope you found it informative. I hope I haven't kept you from your lunch too long, but please just ask me any question that you want. If any of you are not already existing customers on the tool and you would like to have a trial, then again, please come to me and I can sort that out after the webinar. All of you will get a summary email from us with the presentation as well. So if you've missed anything, if I've gone over anything too quick, you'll have this, you'll have a recording, and then you can go over there. But thank you all very much for your time. Like I say, I'm just going to pop myself on mute for 2 seconds, read your questions, and then we'll get stuck into the Q&A and wrap up.